The Bones and Bobbins podcast is now on Patreon!
Woo!
Would you like access to bonus episodes, digital extras, exclusive merch, and more? Join us in the Curiosity Shop at patreon.com/Bones and Bobbins.
Your generous support helps make the show happen and will also earn you our very eternal gratitude and entry into our private Patreon-only Facebook group, which is a delight and also involves murder houses this week, it seems.
It does. It does. I think we should be slightly alarmed that there's enough murder houses to be posting on there, but equally delighted that there's so many people interested into the same things we are. It is a wonderful space where you can let your creepy little crafty self hang out and not have to worry about any drama.
Yeah, and to be fair, it really was a questionable life choice that realtor made to include those kitchen photos.
Seriously, I think that one's
Just
even
saying.
more questionable than the living room one that I found, because the living room, like, I can understand that carpet, blah, blah, blah. But that kitchen one, like, dude, just mop that, get a Swiffer. Like, but hey.
Yeah, but you can't because it's a biohazard.
No, that's true.
I don't imagine they have the insurance required to do that.
Oh, that's fun.
Yeah. Anyway, ew. That is enough of that. In a dusty old shop on a forgotten old street, you'll find two witches with books 3 boxes deep. Next to rusty old needles and faded red thread, you'll come in for yarn, but leave with pigments instead. Whether poisons or patterns, we're always discreet, where creepy and crafty and morbidity meet. Welcome to the Bones and Bobbins podcast. Hello, morbid makers. We are your slightly creepy,
Mildly disconcerting,
somewhat sinister,
delightfully discomposed,
opaquely odd,
merrily morbid.
marvelously misanthropic hosts.
And this is Bones and Bobbins, Season 3, Episode 16, Feminism on Wheels.
I just got out of nowhere. Do you know the poppy song Girls in Bikinis?
Yes. Oh, yeah.
On roller skates
Yes.
in outer space?
Yes.
Well, for some reason, Feminism on Wheels pivoted immediately to that
I can see.
in my mind. And so now I have that very peppy
It is peppy.
dance hit.
Oh, it's a good one.
Yeah, I recommend looking that up, listeners, if you feel the need to have something funny and catchy stuck in your head for the foreseeable future.
Yes.
Yeah. Anyway, I'm Haley from Red Handled Scissors and the Bones and... Wait, no, this is the Bones and Bobbins podcast.
Yay!
I'm Haley from Red Handled Scissors and the Very Serious Crafts podcast, and I go by she and her.
And I'm Natalie from Uber Dark Designs, an official true crime creative, and my pronouns are also she and her.
Yay!
So, hey, hi, how you doing?
I am just cranky about every part of adulting.
Yeah, it's been a week. It's been a week.
Yeah, it has been a week. I just sent you a present.
You're the sweetest.
A deeply practical present.
Again, the sweetest. Because who wants to get themselves practical things? I don't know. I like practical things. I'm weird
I
like
mean,
that.
yeah, so do I. But, yeah. My dad's gonna be here in 5 days, and my house is still a chaotic death pit.
Wow. Chaotic death pit. That's
it's not really.
that reminds me.
It is highly disorganized and in need of a lot of help, but it's fine.
You're getting there.
I started putting up Halloween decorations.
Yay!
Yeah, so I've got a nice crow-related wreath hanging outside my door to go with the welcome mat with crows on it, which has existed in my life since living in New York. So that has always been it was my in front of my apartment doormat, but now it's there, and I got the most ridiculous green pumpkin.
Oh!
Like seafoam green. Real pumpkin.
Really?
And it just looks fake. And my across the street neighbor saw it in my kitchen before I put it outside and was like poking at it, trying to figure out if it was real or if it was resin, because it's just so... It looks very fake, and I like it. I have a definite aesthetic going at the moment.
Nice. Did you get that at a pumpkin farm?
There's this local produce place that makes, like, they're where you stop to get like good local preserves and maple syrup and whatnot, and they also have a bunch of regular produce, and so they are like where you stop to get pumpkins.
Apparently bougie pumpkins.
I mean, that pumpkin would have been very expensive in Brooklyn. But it was normal here. So that's good. So I have a green one, an orange one, and a white one.
Nice.
All the same general shape. Various sizes. I'm feeling pleased.
Very nice.
How are you?
I'm actually pretty good. We've not acquired our pumpkins yet because we do that as a family. And eldest is off at college. Last trip home, we did not make it to pumpkin procurement. But this weekend, we are taking a road trip back to whence we came. And we're going to try to hunt down the pumpkin cart where we get our pumpkins every year and take pictures on, and hopefully they are still there, and hopefully they still have pumpkins. I also hope they still have spaghetti squash, because I love that shit. Also,
I think they probably will, because they definitely still do here.
Yay. Two good things from this week. Number one, I think I mentioned in one of our, I don't know if it was the Patreon or the main episode, that I got slightly not called out necessarily, but inquired by a patron about whether or not I had knitted the socks that I swore I was going to knit. And like 2 years ago.
You mean those socks that you never started?
Right. Mm-hmm. So I have researched method, because if you are not a crafter, I mean, even if you're a crafter, if you're not a knitter, you may not know that there is now DPNs, magic loop, double circulars. There's different ways.
I mean, that has been the case for like as long as any of those things have existed.
Yeah, well, as somebody who is scared, I used to be scared of double pointed needles in general. I call them the double pointed needles of death, because I'm a little derpy, a little clumsy, and I always imagined myself accidentally killing myself by impaling myself on one of those things. And
I mean, you can get them that sharp, but you don't have to.
I know. I mean, and like 2 straight needles, fine, but juggling that many of them to make a sock, and they're so thin and tiny, oof, no. But then my friend Matt was like, I can learn you the ways of the double pointed needles. And so him and I sat down and I made a hat in an afternoon, like just getting used to how to do it. I was like, this is not as nearly as scary as I thought. And
no, it just seems like it ought to be
right.
more complicated than it is.
So upon all of my research, I'm going DPNs for my first pair. I'm just going to go with some self-striping sock yarn. And the last part is to pick a pattern, because there's different ways to do socks, whether you're doing toe up or all the different ways.
I was going to ask how you
So if not, that's the last step.
Do it.
And then
May I make a suggestion?
Yes, abso-fucking-lutely. Suggest to me, please.
Okay, as someone whose calves are proportionally larger than people seem to think lady calves are, I have found that toe up allows for the most flexibility with trying on and making adjustments.
Which is where I was leaning. So, yes.
Yep.
It's decided.
And also, it's really fun to turn the heel. And then by the time you're done with any of that complicated stuff, and turning a heel isn't actually complicated, it just seems like it is.
Yeah.
It's just short rows. Like, that's really it. Just short rows. It's just short rows that don't make sense if you don't think geometrically, but once you do it once, you will totally understand.
You've heard it here, folks.
And yeah,
I'm doing toe up.
No, I promise. Like,
yep.
I was super, super intimidated. I started doing toe up mostly to avoid having to do Kitchener stitch.
Valid, very valid.
Yep, because I hate it.
Yeah.
But
I don't know many that truly like it.
No. But I think it's a nice way to start.
Yep.
You can get like a better, smoother, like more rounded toe finish if you're doing top down. But
yeah.
I don't know that unless you're using like very specific made to measure to your foot patterns for very specific like hiking or something, it doesn't matter.
So this all is a bit of a victory for me because I will overthink myself to death and over-research myself to death as a podcast. So the fact that I was like, I'm going to figure this out and I've honed in now. Now I also I'm also building in an accountability factor. And I have found that there are people that will either hang out with me or knit along with me, or basically I'm going to have a little online craft coven. So like,
I'll cast on socks with you. I love making socks.
Awesome. So boom. That's one of my big wins for this week.
I would have to find my yarn and needles. And
yeah, I have to acquire sock yarn and needleage this weekend. Which makes me...
do you have the book Knitting Rules by Stephanie Pearl McPhee?
I do not.
Her sock recipe is what taught me how to make socks.
Perfect. I will add that to my list of things to require this weekend.
I cannot remember if it is top down or toe up, but it completely demystified all of sock making.
Nice. I need that.
Yeah.
So yeah, and I'm just going to get, because I have a friend that does, there's so many amazing yarn dyers out there, and here's the thing.
Oh, yeah.
Most of them do sock weight, and I'm like,
yeah.
I'm a chunky gal. I'm I'm a 4 and up. That's where I love. But now I'll be able to get sock yarn from people that I adore. Lady Pearl is the lady that I adore, Lindsay. So that's good. And then I also discovered, because when I do creative designing work, I like to have stuff on the background. Usually it's podcasts. Sometimes it's a show. And this week I discovered a show. Now I watch it on Discovery Plus, so I'm not sure like where it airs on regular TV, but it's called We Bought a Funeral Home. And at first I was like, nah. It is so fucking delightful. And the gist is this British family who is living in I almost said Canada, in Canada.
In Canada.
They moved from Toronto to a small town called Dresden, and they buy a 12,000 square foot funeral home
Oh, that's a fucking gigantic funeral home.
To remodel into their personal home. And I
have several questions.
It's wonderful. Ask away. I may know the answers.
Oh, no. I mean, I have noticed that the most commonly, like, well-preserved Victorian homes that are the age of my home that aren't broken up into individual apartments are almost always funeral homes.
Exactly. And this family is absolutely
12,000 square feet, though.
Yeah. This family is...
My house is 5,000.
I know. I was trying to figure it out. Like, I was looking at it, and I was trying to math your house, how it would fit into it.
Yeah, I mean, mine is technically a mansion, and that is, like, a fucking estate.
It is. And so this family it's the husband and wife / mom and dad. There's a 19-year-old son, and I can't remember. I think the daughter's like 12.
Yeah.
12 or 13. It is the sweetest family. Like, yes, they dress in black, but they're not like super overly dramatic goth.
Oh my gosh, they're a British goth family.
Yeah. And you would love the mother's Heather. You would love her design aesthetic. Like, I think you would really enjoy this show. It's not overproduced.
All right, wait, what's it called now?
We Bought a Funeral Home.
Open it. We Bought a Funeral Home.
Okay. And it's not overly produced. The family's very genuine. They seem like lovely people. The contractor's cool. They don't overplay dramatics. They do have you will appreciate that they have, they discover early on that they have bats in the building.
Did I tell you that I made a bat mad?
Oh, no.
Another one?
Another one.
Okay, I have now found it, and I also already have Discovery Plus, so we know what I'm doing later.
Yes. You also let me know how you like it. I think there's like 5 episodes out, but delightful. Delightful.
Yeah.
Just a really great watch.
I'm about to fall into home restoration TV, like branching out beyond this old house.
Oh,
I feel it on the horizon.
This is a good branch for you because, yeah. I want to say all of the things, but you're gonna watch it, so it's great.
All right, well, I will text you excitedly.
Yay!
And possibly chatter excitedly at the Facebook group. Nice. But yeah, so I think that I mentioned on the last episode, or maybe the Patreon episode, that the Murder Shack came down.
Yes.
Not like on its own. Like we paid someone to bring it down. And as we were watching it come down, just this incensed bat flew out from one of the basements, because the Murder Shack was connected to the basements. It's a whole bunch of bullshit. And I wonder if it was the one I've already escorted out once. Oh,
that would make sense.
Yeah. And I mean, it's fine. The even if it gets back in there, that basement is like, it's the building on top, that not the Murder Shack, but other parts are is a barn. So it has like the multi-level like grates and stuff like that. So the bat can get in and out if it needs to.
Nice.
But like, oops, sorry, buddy.
Oopsie doops.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Maybe we should talk about things.
We should. In fact, we should thank our fantastic Curiosity Shop members. Real quick,
shit, that was
over on Patreon.
supposed to be me.
No. If you join us today, you'll get yourself a very special, totally normal, not at all creepy shout out welcome in our next episode.
It's true, because you're the best, and we would totally go explore hidden old graveyards in the woods with you.
Absolutely. And if you want in on this one, not only are you going to get some really great surprises and stuff, but you're also going to get a huge backlog of Patreon-only episodes, like over 50. I think we're closing in on 60 at this point, actually. So all of the listening joys and some, outbursts you can hear. I think I posted my child burping. Bloopers are posted. we get a little more personal. We accidentally dox ourselves and drop our kids' names. It's fun.
Yeah, I definitely accidentally doxed myself. Not that it was going to be very hard to find me, because, property records. But, oh boy.
They get us
anyway.
Glory.
Yeah.
Join us. Gift us.
Do join us.
Speaking of gifts.
Yeah.
Today, I am going to talk about one of the gifts I think that's probably asked for more than almost anything else.
Especially around the holiday season?
Yep. Bicycles. And nothing quite puts the fun and functional like the humble bicycle. Which has
Unless you get hit by a car while riding it.
Yeah, well.
Ask how I know.
Oh, no.
And I guess it was technically a truck, not a car.
Oh, geez.
But yes.
Oh,
anyway.
My goodness. There will be mentions of accidents, I believe. So it's easy to see how, as an invention, it would be revolutionary. But did you know that it also helped fuel a revolution?
No. Well, actually, yes. Yes, I do.
I was going to say you do. So that's what we're going to kind of tandem tackle today. I'm going to start.
Did you make a tandem bicycle joke on purpose?
I didn't.
Okay.
That was just
needed to.
No.
Mm-hmm.
That was just my inner pun lover coming out without even knowing it.
I was just checking.
I'm going to start with the history of bicycles. And typically when I say take you back to the beginning of things, it's usually, to my favorite Egyptians. But today we're only going back to the early 19th century, where I try to navigate...
I was going to be really impressed if you tied the Egyptians into this.
Given enough time, I probably could, but yeah, no. That would also make for a very long episode. So today I'm going to try to navigate the pretty bumpy road to try to answer the whole who invented the bicycle question. And it begins with something that was dubbed the dandy horse. Now, when I say it was dubbed the dandy horse, it was not a term of endearment. It was meant to be like derogatory.
Well, neither was dandy.
Right. So that's why, dandy. Anyway, its given name was the Lauf machine, which essentially translates to running machine. and it was given it by its inventor, German Baron Karl von Drais, in 1817. He would later patent
that isn't what it's actually called in German now, so that's funny.
Right.
Yeah.
He would later...
entirely different name.
He would later patent it in France in 1818 using the name Velocipede, which is super fun. So the dandy horse, just because that's a fun name even if it was not nice, was a two-wheeled...
That's going to be a band.
Yeah, it needs to be.
Dandy horse.
So it was a two-wheeled vehicle with both wheels in line, and it was propelled by the rider pushing along the ground with their feet, kind of like in a regular walking or running method. The front wheel and the handlebar assembly were hinged to allow steering, and it was capable of like more than doubling the average walking speed to around 10 miles per hour or 16 kilometers per hour if you be people other than Americans on the level ground. Drais was inspired, at least in part, by the need to develop a form of transit that did not rely on the horse. I am going to avoid the really sad deep dive into why that is, because it's sad, and it involves horses not being able to be horses, and also having to provide as food and stuff, and it's not fun.
No.
While Drace's Velocipede only enjoyed a brief stint in the spotlight before falling out of fashion, poet John Keats derided it as the nothing of the day. His early version continued to improve upon across Europe. So, Keats thought it was cool. So, it had to be cool.
I mean, listen to Keats, man.
Several manufacturers in France and England made their own dandy horses during its brief popularity. In the summer of 1819, most notably Dennis Johnson of London, who used an elegantly curved wooden frame that allowed the use of larger wheels. In the U.S., a patent for the two-wheeled human-powered vehicle was awarded to W.K. Clarkson of New York on June 26, 1819. However, in 1836, a fire at the U.S. Patent Office destroyed the only surviving drawings, and a prototype of the invention was never built by Clarkson. So, wah-wah.
That sucks.
Right? Dandy horses first appeared on the footpaths of Mannheim, Germany in 1820, but they were heavy and cumbersome, which pretty much then caused riders to prefer to operate them on smoother pavements instead of like back roads and trails. As people do be peopling, even back then, their interactions with pedestrians, to put it nicely, caused many municipalities worldwide to enact laws prohibiting their use. And in New York City, a law was passed that banned dandy horses from all footpaths and public places. NYC was
there's
not
still a
having it.
war regarding bicycles in New York.
Later
not great.
Yeah, I can imagine. Especially especially now, like, it's one of the only affordable. It's actually affordable and accessible.
Public transit.
You're right.
Is probably the most affordable and accessible.
More affordable than just owning a bike?
Sure.
Really? Huh.
I mean, bikes need repairs pretty frequently. They're not
true, and maintenance.
Necessarily cheap. They don't work in all weather. I mean,
you can tell
they
I'm
technically do, but they don't.
You can tell I'm an avid biker. Not.
And also cars hit them.
Yeah, that's true. So later designs of the dandy horses avoided the initial drawback. So they changed basically the ability to conform with the height and the stride of its rider. So you could measure it better. It was just one and that's it. One size did not fit all.
Which is really important.
Right. So an example is Nesifor Nipsey's 1818 model with an adjustable saddle for his velocipede, built by Lagrange. There would be a couple of adaptations before we landed on the bicycle. From the 1820s to the 1850s, the mechanics and principles behind the draisine, which is another word for the, obviously because drays, his invention would be seen in some 3-wheel or tricycle and 4-wheel or quadricycle options that would attempt to use pedals, treadles, and hand cranks, but their extreme weight and high rolling resistance pretty much doomed them. It was just pretty much too big for the average person to be able to maneuver and to propel forward. However,
fair enough. Those are heavy.
Yeah. Willard Sawyer in Dover successfully manufactured a range of treadle-operated 4-wheel vehicles and exported them worldwide in 1815. And those are just some examples of the variations. The first mechanically propelled 2-wheel versus just, hi, I'm walking this thing, is believed by some to have been built by Scottish blacksman Kirkpatrick Macmillan in 1839. A nephew later claimed that his uncle developed a wheel-driven design using mid-mounted treadles connected by rods to a rear crank similar to the transmission of a steam locomotive. Proponents associate him with the first recorded instance of a bicycling traffic offense when a Glasgow newspaper reported in 1842 an incident in which an anonymous gentleman from Dumfriesshire bestrided a velocipede of ingenious design, knocked over a pedestrian in the Gorbals, and was fined 5 shillings. However, the evidence
it was of ingenious design.
Exactly.
I like that they had to include that.
Right. The evidence connecting this with Macmillan is kind of weak. Mainly because it is highly unlikely at the time that Artisan Macmillan would have been termed a gentleman, and the report is really not clear on how many wheels this ingenious design had. So some people say that it might have been faked by his son. Either way, I think it's a wonderful story. A similar machine was said to have been produced by Gavin Dozzell of Lesmahago. I'm sorry for mispronouncing that. I have no idea how. I forgot to look up the pronunciation of that one, but it's
Where's I think it's the location?
Lesmahago, around 1845. There's no record of Dalzell ever having laid claim to inventing the machine. It is believed that he copied the idea, having recognized the potential to help him with his local drapery business, and there is some evidence that he used the contraption to make his wares into the rural community around him. A replica of...
That makes sense.
Right. A replica still exists today in the Glasgow Museum of Transport, and that exhibit holds the honor of being the oldest bike in existence today. So it makes sense that this guy would make this machine. My dad was a tool and die maker, and I can't tell you how many times if we didn't have a part for something, you just go friggin' make it. Like, it in my head, it makes sense that he would be like, I need something that's going to do this so that I could get, my things into this next town or around. It makes sense to me that he would then build that one thing for him for that purpose and not be like, hey, sure, I'm going to suddenly become a bike smith.
I don't think that I knew that your dad was a die and tool maker. That's cool, and it makes a world of sense.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, it's and just it's something he totally loved to do too, and he still does. It's yeah, that's my dad. I loves him. But beginning in the 1860s, several different French inventors, including Pierre Lemont, Pierre Michaux, and Ernest Michaux, developed prototypes with pedals attached to the front wheel. These were the first machines to be called bicycles, but they were also known as bone shakers for their rough ride.
Ooh.
The first documented producer...
I think there's a bicycle bar called Bone Shakers in New York.
That would make sense, and that's pretty awesome.
I think Jeremy used to go there.
That's cool. I like that.
I think maybe it is owned by a Blackheart of Joan Jett and the Blackhearts.
Nice. That makes it even better.
I think. And this might not exist anymore. This is from my misspent youth.
Oh, that would make me sad. The first documented producer of a rod-driven two-wheeler, treadle bicycles, was Thomas McCall of Kilmarnock in 1869. That design was inspired by the French front crank velocipede of the Lemont Michaux type. In hopes of adding stability, inventors such as Eugene Meyer and James Starley later introduced new models that sported an oversized front wheel. Dubbed penny farthings or ordinaries, these oddly shaped machines became all the rage in 1870s and the 1880s and helped give rise to the first bicycle clubs and competitive races. What made them oddly shaped was the giant front wheel that was believed to help with shock absorption and speed. While it was a difficult, dangerous machine, it was simpler, lighter, and faster than the safer velocipedes of the time. Two new developments changed this situation and led to the rise of safety bicycle. The first was the chain drive, originally on tricycles, allowing a gear ratio to be chosen independent of wheel size. The second was the pneumatic bicycle tire, which allowed smaller wheels to provide a smoother ride. Now, the nephew of the man responsible for the popularity of the penny farthing was largely responsible, ironically, for its demise. So James Starley James Starley had built the aerial Spirit of the Air high wheeler in 1870, but this was a time of intervention and when chain drives were upgraded so that each link had a small roller. Higher and higher speeds became possible without the need for that front large wheel. And beginning in 1884, an Englishman named Thomas Stevens famously rode a high-wheeler bike on a journey across the globe. So that's pretty fun. But then in 1885, Starley's nephew, John Kemp Starley, took these new developments to launch the modern bicycle, the Rover safety bicycle, so called because the rider seated much lower and farther behind the front wheel contact point and was then less prone to basically taking a header. In 1888, when John Dunlop reinvented the pneumatic tire for his son's tricycle, the high wheel was made obsolete. The comfortable ride once found only on the tall wheels could now be enjoyed on smaller chain-driven bicycles. And by 1893, high wheelers were no longer being produced, and the use lingered into the 1920s in track cycling until racing safety bicycles were adequately designed. And you may be thinking, cool, but what was that you mentioned about a revolution? I got you. So I just needed to bring us up to it. Ultimately, with bikes came freedom for women in a way they had never really seen. A type of safety bicycle was designed specifically for women, in particular with a drop frame, in order to accommodate women's clothing. Never mind our genetically different bodies, but hey. However, the long skirts and the tight-fitted bodices of this time period made cycling an even greater challenge. It made everything a fucking greater challenge. Therefore, several modified outfits were offered to women that would accommodate the bicycle, which the lovely Haley will be taking us down.
Is true.
In instructive books written for women on how to ride a bicycle, many authors insist that wearing bicycle costumes made it easier to ride. In making a choice, though, women to a small degree were then able to take control of their life, not just in an ability to be mobile without requiring a man, but in how they dressed. And before I completely step away from that, so as to not step on toes, I wanted to read a verse to a rendition of Mary Had a Little Lamb from 1895, written by Stanislaus Stange, that I found.
Oh, please.
Dear Mary, said the little lamb, it gives me quite a fright to see these girls on bicycles. They're such a novel sight. What is it they all bloomers wear? The sight my blood congeals. Then Mary touched her forehead thus, and gently murmured, Wheels. Okay, back to the freedom of transportation.
Yeah.
During the late 19th century, doctors began encouraging everyone in the public to exercise more often, and that helped pump up the popularity in the activity of cycling. But we mustn't encourage too much freedom for women, so doctors would push narratives to keep them from doing so, quote, excessively. In 1895 article... Yeah. In an 1895 article in the Literary Digest, reviewed literature from the time period regarding bicycle face, and noted that the Springfield Republican warned against excessive cycling by women, girls, and middle-aged men. The bicycle face was described as a face usually flushed, but sometimes pale, often with lips more or less drawn, and the beginning of dark shadows under the eyes, and always an expression of weariness. I mean, that's me on the daily without any biking.
I was going to say, me?
But, go off Springfield Republican.
We've got bicycle face.
Right? It's not rustic bitch face, it's bicycle face.
Bicycle face.
These articles pushed forth the belief that excessive cycling made women vulnerable to many diseases, such as developing an exophthalmic goiter, appendicitis, and internal inflammation. His article was subsequently discussed and analyzed in the Advertiser. Overall, these diagnoses reflect on how doctors during this time period viewed women and their bodies as weak, which is ignorant and stupid patriarchy.
Yeah, clearly they have never encountered a menstrual cramp.
Right. Oof. Another concern doctors had about women riding bicycles was over their sexual health. Doctors believed that the bicycle saddle taught masturbation to women and girls.
I wish.
Riding astride anything was seen as too masculine for any proper women. These physicians wrote
Have they met horses?
Even horses, yeah. The side saddle. These physicians wrote in detail in medical journals about how the bicycle could be used for masturbation.
Great.
Quote,
thanks.
If you're wondering, quote, the saddle can be tilted in every bicycle as desired. In this way, a girl could, by carrying the front peak or pommel high, or by relaxing the stretch leather in order to let it form a deep hammock-like concavity, which would fit itself snugly over the entire vulva and reach up in front, bring about constant friction over the clitoris and labia. This pressure would be much increased by stooping forward, and the warmth generated from vigorous exercise might further increase the feeling.
Wait, they used all of those words?
Allegedly.
Because, current medical texts don't even refer to the clitoris.
Right.
But also, great. Thanks, man. For the tutorial.
But, I mean, let's face it. They weren't really concerned about sexual health. It was really sexual morality. And the fact that the
Well.
bicycle had potential to awaken sexual feelings in women not only threatened their sexual purity, but it also threatened to destroy gender definitions and context of sexual morality.
Oh no.
Add to this the freedom it gives, and it was another way the bicycle was seen as blurring the definition of masculine and feminine characteristics, which, oh my goodness.
Shit.
At the same time as male doctors were stating the capabilities of women and the weakness of our bodies, even though they don't fucking know because they were guys, in relation to the bicycle enthusiasts disagreed with the medical assessment and asserted that the physical activity was good to improve one's health and vitality, and women began to express what their bodies were capable of for themselves through magazine articles. Women like Mary Bislett, Mary Sargent Hopkins, and Emma Moffat Ting contested medical commonplaces and promoted new ones in their place. These women stated that cycling brought long and active muscles back to life and helped riders feel better emotionally, and encouraged women to use their own experiences with the bicycle to determine their own physical limits and not what doctors had said. These women brought to public attention the positive aspects that help women riders. The bicycle not only makes them literally stronger, but also more confident in their own abilities. This in turn not only gives women a greater agency over their body, gasp, but also mentally strengthens them to take on their previous domestic role and explore new roles in the public sphere. Again, gasp. Which, of course, men did not like. They did not like it at all.
Oh, heavens, no.
And that's the point in history that I'm going to leave you on. Because Haley will be diving us head first into it. But before I do...
I'm going to pick up what you're putting down.
Nice. Before I do, I want to give a shout out to Andy Londonderry. She is the first woman to have cycled the world as early as 1894, 1895. Because badass women are my favorite, and I shout them out when I can. So,
hot damn.
That is...
I love it when...
Right? I was like, get it, girl. So that's how bikes came about to be, and how doctors are dumb. No, that's not right. Male doctors of that time period.
I mean, how they neglect the physical anatomy of women.
Right, and I have to it's a questionable source on that quote. I'm guessing somebody translated it in a way that they felt, because back then they were calling hysteria the vapors and putting people in, if you had excessive orgasms, you were going into like a mental ward. It was not, I don't think that they described it specifically as such, but the gist of the deal is that's how you could, and that's how they said no.
I mean, all I have to say is my bicycle and I have not become that familiar.
Right? Like, I mean, maybe that's why all those chicks take cycling classes, but I would like to think that there'd be like a whole take this thing, because this is, I would think if it was popular, it would, or common, it would be. We talk, we share.
I mean, there's a reason that padded shorts for bicycling exist, and it's because it hurts when you hit the seat.
Yeah, which, again, like, you think that it would be better constructed, but...
Smash.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So, on the note of wrinkling one's nose at the patriarchy, I am going to tell you about where bicycles and outerwear for women specifically suddenly caused all manner of drama and gasping and pearl clutching.
Yes.
Yeah. So, I'm going to tell you about Victorian dress reform and the Rational Dress Society. So, at about the same time-ish, in both the United States and in England, the first wave of feminism was slowly but firmly roaring to life, I would say. And the beginnings of the United States dress reform movement started in about 1871 with names that you probably recognize, specifically Elizabeth Cady Stanton and her neighbor Amelia Bloomer. And they started wearing a set of clothing designed by Elizabeth Smith Miller, who was Stanton's cousin. And, you know, when you think of the name Bloomer, I'm going to go ahead and give Amelia Bloomer a nod with regards to bloomers. So, yo, what's up, Amelia Bloomer? So this made a bunch of people, especially men, pretty mad. But as it turns out, several things that made largely men pretty mad all combine into one sort of unstoppable sweep of progress with women's ability to dress, move about, and also travel by their own accord. And so that deciding factor was, as you mentioned earlier, the bicycle. And by the 1890s, bloomers were solidifying their place in women's dress. Yes. And so we will move on to the Rational Dress Society, which was formed in London in 1881. And when we're talking about these kinds of reforms and these kinds of moral sensibilities with regard to dress, I think it's important that we point out that we are talking about the rising middle class and upper class women.
Yes.
We are not talking about poorer women who have long needed, or who have long done and worn items and done jobs that wouldn't necessarily align with proper feminine sensibilities. So we're definitely talking about specifically high society women. For the Rational Dress Society, this was specifically high society women in London. But much like the suffragette movement that was also happening at this time in the US, we're also very specifically talking about women who had enough money and social standing to withstand the scorn of the men they were offending.
Yeah, it was definitely not intersectional.
Ooh, goodness, no. Alright, so there is an interesting article that I was looking at on newspapers.com that was talking about this particular history and specifically about the Rational Dress Society in London, which I think is especially interesting because, I mean, it involved people with titles, and it's always kind of fun when you've got titles, but also it was truly organized in the way that I feel like only Victorian London could organize things, like with rules and shit, and offices, and like hierarchical structures within the group.
Yes.
So
making it far more difficult than necessary.
Yes. So in 1881, a group of high society women gathered in London to form the Rational Dress Society. And this was intended to make specifically Victorian women's dress more practical and more comfortable and more healthful. So within the society, the group actually came up with criteria for the perfect dress, which included 1, freedom of movement, 2, absence of pressure over any part of the body.
Thank you.
Apparently, sorry, bicycle seats. No more weight than is necessary for warmth, and both weight and warmth evenly distributed. 4, grace and beauty combined with comfort and convenience. And 5, not departing too conspicuously from the ordinary dress of the time. So, although none of these things sound particularly earth-shattering to a modern ear, these ideas were spectacularly controversial during a time when the dress norms involved heavy fabrics and corsets and bustles and hoop skirts and just a lot of big, heavy, draped clothing. And this clothing wouldn't have been very conducive to actually exercising. Like, even pieces of clothing that are technically made for that, like walking dresses or something like that, they still are incorporating huge amounts of very heavy fabric that needs to be cared for and picked up to keep out of the way. And like, it just, you cannot freely move when you've got that much stuff attached to you.
Right.
I mean, it just is true. So the women in this group explained that dress reform would allow for participating in activities that were physical and were supposed to be healthful. And so, obviously, specifically, this referred to cycling. And because cycling and dress reform and also the suffrage movement, lack of movements for ceasing drinking, temperance movements, all of those things sort of wrapped up into one time period where everything was set to fall into place for this kind of massive change. And so, because bicycles and pants suddenly provided a whole lot more freedom, an awful lot of movements that you wouldn't necessarily think of as being interconnected really truly were. And so a founding member of this society was Viscountess Florence Wallace Pomeroy, who was also known as Lady Haberton, who was the wife of the 6th Viscount Haberton. And in 1880, she took up the cause of dress reform because she really liked to bicycle. But her heavy long skirts got in the way. And she wasn't necessarily, like, I think when people think of women suddenly being like, oh yes, trousers, please, are thinking of like the tight pants that men of that era would wear. Except that isn't really what we're talking about at all.
Right.
We're talking about things that basically look like T-length skirts. And they happen to be pants, but they involve a pretty spectacular amount of fabric. And certainly do not... They aren't something I would look at and be like, whoo, that lady's showing an awful lot.
They're culotte-esque.
Yeah, they look a lot like culottes. And so she specifically championed reform dress, which consisted of baggy pantaloons worn underneath a knee-length skirt. And by knee-length, it's longer. It's below the knee. And she also invented the divided skirt, which, I mean, if you've been anywhere on the internet, you have probably seen someone in what looks like a beautiful maxi dress suddenly do some sort of dance high kick and be like, ah, it's pants!
Yes.
And be very excited. Well, this is more or less that.
With pockets.
With pockets. It's true. And so I think my favorite part of this, well, actually, let me read you the, there's a newspaper excerpt that announces the founding of the organization, which I find to be especially delightful. So this is from, excuse me, July of 1881 from London News, and it reads, The Rational Dress Society. The Rational Dress Society, under the presidency of Viscountess Haberton. Oh dear, I have accidentally clicked.
Oh no.
All right. Anyway, the Rational Dress Society, under the presidency of Viscountess Haberton, have advanced so far as to appoint a provisional committee comprising 6 ladies zealous in the cause of dress reform. Besides the treasurer, Mrs. Howes and Mrs. E.M. King, who has generously taken upon herself duties of secretary, we gather from this prospectus that there is no intention on the part of society to interfere with individual liberty. On the contrary, the desire is simply to release ladies from the tyranny of mere fashion, by permitting them to consult their own taste and convenience upon the sole condition that their attire shall be pleasing to the eye while conforming to the considerations of health and comfort. An annual contribution of ½ a crown will constitute membership. The society hope to obtain their objects by means of drawing-room meetings, advertisements, circulating pamphlets and leaflets, and above all by issuing patterns designed by members or others which have received the approval of the committee. And so when they're talking about that, they are absolutely talking about sewing patterns.
I love that. I don't know if I like the fact that patterns are included more, or if I like the whole release from the tyranny of fashion.
Yeah, I think that the funniest part of that announcement to me is that they are trying to reassure people that they aren't trying to impede on individual liberty. So, like, were people afraid that suddenly they weren't going to be allowed to wear their full skirts and stuff. Like, oh no, now you may only wear pants forever. Like, I don't think so. So after the formation of the Rational Dress Society, there was a Rational Dress Society London exhibition in 1883, and its descriptions are kind of fascinating. So this is another excerpt from an 1883 newspaper from newspapers.com. A costume for climbing recommended to lady mountaineers.
Ooh.
Riding pants, I know, right? Riding pants with an ingenious arrangement of small pleats at the back set up with elastic, a divided skirt, and polonaise flannel combination garment and silk chemise, a hat weighing 1 ounce, a complete walking costume guaranteed all wool that weighs only 3.5 pounds.
Ooh.
A dress for a fancy ball, Joan of Arc in full armor.
Yes.
Yes, and a lady's traveling dress that turns in 5 minutes into a stylish dinner costume and goes into a box 10 inches long. One difficulty that seems in the way is the adaptation of easy clothing to a fickle climate. The 1 ounce hat and the 3.5 pounds all wool dress would come very badly out of a thunderstorm, and the divided skirt and polonaise caught in a heavy shower would bear a rather flappy appearance. But we do not despair of the difficulty being overcome. And then, who among the leaders of fashion will start a new era in the history of dress by courageously donning the divided skirt?
Courageously.
So, that is...
I want to see all of the things.
So there are plenty of cartoons and illustrations, and I mean, you can imagine the same people who are doing the political cartoons about suffragettes.
Oh, yes.
Definitely
I can imagine.
were involved in this as well. Yeah. So, then bouncing on back to the United States, just going to take another look, just an overall view of the collision of the fashion and the politics of what was going on and the names that were involved. So there's a historic costume and textiles collection at The Ohio State University, which I am contractually obligated to make a face about because I went to the University of Michigan for undergrad, and I am told there is a sports ball rivalry. I have zero further information. But anyway, go blue. So in an article called Reforming Fashion, 1850 to 1914, Politics, Health, and Art, that was written by Marlise Shoney. Actually, I do believe this was an entire exhibition, actually. Has a collection of all of these different varieties of clothing that were being tried out during the dress reform movement that began in the late 19th century and continued through the early 20th century. So silhouette changes were obviously already very much happening, especially in like what we know about for Victorian fashions. We are going from basically no defined curves to very defined curves to no defined curves. And so the foundation garments that were associated with creating these fashions and these silhouettes were often the items that were also contributing to women's inability to move freely. So a chemise, petticoats, hoops, bustles, corsets, all of those things that basically created a very specific shape onto which clothing could drape were no longer actually practical for women who wanted to be more active. And so there were a lot of women, and including the obvious feminists, but also health advocates and educators that thought that especially fashionable dress with all of those foundation garments, with all of the strange shapes, were harmful to women's health for the same reasons that you mentioned with regards to bicycling. And so...
Which is just insulting.
Yeah. But I think one of the interesting things that I hadn't really thought about was that one of the less dramatic or less dramatically visible changes that could make a truly dramatic impact on your daily life is the changing of shapes and designs, I guess, of undergarments. Because those changes could happen relatively quietly. Mm-hmm. It wasn't necessarily something you discussed with your husband. And it may have been discussed between women. But a lot of these things could be discreetly adopted without being outwardly obvious that you were being rebellious. So I thought that was interesting.
It is, and it's also, there is something to be said about having that empowerment of sorts. Like, just when you go out and you know, like, you brought underwear matches and it's super cute, and you know what I mean? Like, there's a certain boost that gives you in a way that nothing else might in the same manner, because it's like, I did this for myself and I know that I, you know, like this and look good and feel good, and you know, and it could be anything, but you know, it could be even gender affirming undergarments, you know what I mean?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And it doesn't have to be anybody's business but yours.
So there's a freedom in that, because there's not quite the same safety concerns and things. So yeah, I like that.
Yeah, so this article pointed out, and I thought it was interesting because I don't usually think about it this way, but it said that at the time, fashionable women reshaped their bodies not with diet and exercise, but with layers of undergarments that built up a structure that then supported clothing that would make the ideal silhouette. So that's just, it's very interesting to me that like it was a mechanical process.
Yeah.
And it also really makes sense why it might have been so difficult to make those changes, because it wasn't like you were just removing something troublesome. You were destabilizing the entire structure of your clothing.
Yeah.
If you were making any of these changes. And so I think it's especially interesting and especially brave, but it also makes the shapes that came out of these early like sewing patterns and from the Rational Dress Society, things like that, like it makes sense how they ended up, the shapes that they ended up, if you're looking at it through that lens and not just the lens of practicality.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so the process of getting dressed in the time right before all of this really, really took hold was super time consuming. It wasn't like, I mean, and I guess this is sort of a stereotype for like a businesswoman, but women weren't just throwing on a bra, a slip, pantyhose, a dress, pumps. Like that is a relatively straightforward thing.
Mm-hmm.
Don't at me about foundation garments. I am team slip. I don't care if anybody else is not. It's cool. You do you. So when getting dressed, fashionable women would first put on stockings, which would be gathered under the knee with elastic bands or tied there with ribbon that could reduce circulation to the legs because you have to have them tight enough to not fall down. You might put on very high, hard to button shoes because once your corset was on, you couldn't really bend down and
Oh God, yeah.
do that. And so instead of just like what we would think of as normal underwear now, there were many layers involved, at least two pieces, which, I mean, arguably there are now, but these were a lot more bulky. So you would have drawers and a chemise because you needed to have a separate area, like the drawers would be split so you could use the bathroom while not having to undress because you couldn't undress. And you might have, and those drawers themselves were, funnily enough, generally speaking, trousers. Yeah, we don't think of them as that, but they are essentially knee-length pants already. But then you have your corset that is generally speaking boned. And we've discussed corsets and how corsets shouldn't hurt if they fit properly.
Yes.
But they certainly are a structured garment and aren't necessarily the best for taking really solid deep breaths.
Right.
And I mean, you certainly cannot say pick up something off the floor that you dropped.
No.
Anything like that. So once you've got that on, then you've got a corset cover, and then a bustle, to make your butt look really big and your waist look really small. And then you would have, and bustles are, like, they can have pleats and a lot of extra fabric, and then you would have a petticoat on top of that. So we're still doing underwear here.
Yeah.
Which is a lot. And then you might put on a gown, which might also have a boned bodice. So in addition to the boning in your corset. And your skirt might be stiffened. There may be additional fabric in the back for fullness. And that's like reasonable weather.
You're still gearing up.
If it's cold. Yeah. If it's cold, then, you might have a jacket that would also maybe be beaded. Basically, according to this exhibition at Ohio State, a complete outfit could weigh as much as 25 pounds.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, that's getting reasonably close to, like, wearing fire.
I was just looking
gear.
up how much that weighs.
Yeah, I think it weighs about 50 pounds, I think. But I might just be thinking about the axe. I don't know. Anyway, so you can see how frustrating it would be to be, like, you would be exhausted before you even started doing any physical activity,
right?
Just by way of dealing with the sheer amount of weight and bullshit that you are under. And
firefighter gear weighs around 45 pounds. That's just the clothing aspect. That's not including any firefighting accoutrement that may be tacked on as well.
Yeah. So I think that if you've got all of the mask and the axe and all the tanks and all the nonsense also connected, it weighs about as much as I do.
Oh gosh.
Which is like, what? That's a lot of bullshit. And I'm just imagining ladies at this time walking around with me on their backs. Just like, yo. Like, hanging in the most inconvenient ways. Like, around the waist, upside down. Like, anyway. So, long full skirts. They were the first thing that reformers were like, no. Because they were actually a practical and health hazard, because you would drag them on the ground and then bring in whatever the hell was on the ground back.
I often thought cleaning those would have been a bitch, because the bottoms are always so dirty.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, so basically everything is heavy, everything is collecting crap from everywhere you walk, and then imagine wearing all of those undergarments that are weighted in all different directions and trying to walk upstairs.
Oh god, nope. Up, possibly down, nope.
Yep.
Because when you hold it all up, you couldn't even see over it.
Yeah, and so the reformers, they weren't looking for, like, oh, let's get naked and run around outdoors.
They're like, we don't want to fall and bust our shit, and we don't want to walk around with a toddler on
Yeah.
3 different places.
Well, and they wanted things to be practical, but also modest, presumably because they didn't want to deal with dudes.
Serious. No one really ever wants to deal with dudes being
No.
dudes.
No, and so, and I totally get that. They didn't want legs to be revealed. They didn't want things to be tight-fitting. They were hoping for, well, sometimes there were matching trousers with a knee-length skirt worn over it. So things that wouldn't look drastically different from normal dress, but were orders of magnitude more practical.
Which just makes the whole thing even more sad. That they would have to fight so hard.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, like, trousers, specifically the ones called pantalettes, had been worn under skirts in France since the early 1800s. And they were later also very fashionable for young girls. And they were also being seen, and I believe this is still in France, specifically for, like, gymnasium outfits. Presumably this was, like, gender segregated activities, but they were absolutely wearing pantalettes as those outfits way earlier than the rest of society would be familiar with, I guess. And trousers were also often worn by women in sanitariums and in communal societies because it's easier to move and easier to get dressed. So, though trousers were not in wide and varied use outside of what I just described, Elizabeth Smith Miller, who I mentioned earlier, who was Stanton's cousin, adopted that costume for everyday dress because it was practical and comfortable. And then she introduced it to her cousin, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and to Amelia Bloomer, who is the editor of The Lily, which was a feminist track that was devoted to temperance and women's reform. And so so then Bloomer began wearing the shortened skirt and trousers and then wrote about it in The Lily. And then a local newspaper in Seneca Falls, New York, basically said something nice about it. And then other newspapers also wrote about it and then nicknamed the clothing style the Bloomer. And so Amelia Bloomer observed that though coverage on the subject in newspapers was pretty widespread, that, quote, some of our editorial brethren commend us highly, while others cry out against this, quote, usurpation? I don't know how to say that word out loud. To usurp is the non-conjugated verb. Usurpation of the rights of man. So you're usurping the rights of men by... What rights of men are you usurping? Like, what ones? What can men no longer do because this woman has long pants under also a pretty long skirt? I fail to see the problem. Nobody asked for my opinion, though. So in the 1850s, the whole bloomer costume became used in a pretty widespread way in Europe, specifically England and Germany adopted a similar costume for everyday wear and or sports. And supporters in America were like, oh, hey, this is practical and comfortable and also allows me to do healthy amounts of movement. Shocking. And they also, and I found this to be interesting, saw moral and patriotic qualities in its simplicity. And so it was less waste. It was less like over the top conspicuous consumption. Like, I can see how you would make a moral argument in the same way that temperance was also a moral argument by women who did not want to be beaten by drunk husbands, largely. And so it's really interesting to me that both sides are making an argument about morality, but have come to extremely different conclusions in ways that make very little sense. But whatever, people are wound up, women wearing trousers, oh shit, end of the world. End of the world. And of course, eventually, wearing pants would become associated with women's rights movements, though that wasn't, they happened to evolve alongside each other, and I'm not entirely sure that the people who were advocating for reasonable dress for, like, riding a bicycle were necessarily all in with all of the other aspects that are sort of tied into women being able to move around in society more easily. Mm-hmm. But it's also not surprising that all of those things came together when they did and around the groups that were involved.
Have a perfect storm.
Yeah. And so women like pants, as it turns out. Yep. And they didn't ever really go away again, which I think is kind of fascinating. There are just so many different directions that this conversation can go. Like, there are emancipation suits, which are like a union suit. So, you know, one piece long underwear. Like, that would have been a really dramatic improvement, probably over many, many layers of undergarments, even though we think of it now as a bit much. And those undergarments could also be purchased in separate parts that buttoned, suddenly making it possible for you to maybe use the bathroom more easily or dress yourself. And so there are just a lot of places in daily life that dress reform sort of unexpectedly shows up in. But rational dress and dress reform basically really took hold and stuck around.
Thank God.
Because women wanted to ride bicycles. And that's kind of cool.
It is very cool. And it's certainly helpful that they had something that was a catalyst for this that they could use that men couldn't use against them necessarily. I mean, obviously, they're going to find a way to use it against them anyway. But that they didn't have... men couldn't formulate a very strong, rational argument against it.
No. And because the people visibly involved were largely women with money at the beginning, there was only a certain amount of pushback that society could bring because those women had the ability to withstand that kind of scrutiny. They had the privilege to be visibly doing what they were doing. And it's just a very interesting combination of all of the right things coming together at all of the right times, and women being like, fuck it, I want to ride my bike, and also yo pants.
Yes.
So yeah, that is just a glancing outline of Victorian dress reform, but it gives you the general idea. And there are a couple of interesting stories that I found that I will share in Patreon about early adopters, one of whom had a doll made of her that was in full men's dress that was extremely popular in like toy selling for little girls.
That's awesome.
And yeah, it's really cool. So I'll talk about that on Patreon, but this is, a little glossing over of dress reform.
That was lovely. Do you know what that brings us to?
I can guess. I bet it's
the weekly worst way
worst
to die.
Way to die.
Indeed.
All right, what's yours?
Pretty much just anything bike related. Like, with my luck, I would get something caught in a wheel, fly off, and just, manage to crack my head spectacularly.
I did land on my head when I got hit by the SUV.
Oh, jeez.
Not ideal. So I'm actually going to agree with you. I'm going to go full, I guess getting hit by a truck while riding a bicycle.
That's...
Because I know it sucks, because I have done it.
Yeah, don't do that again.
I will be completely honest and say that I just do not ride my bicycle very often anymore at all because of it.
That makes sense.
And, I mean, this was a very, very long time ago. But, yeah. So, wear a helmet.
Yes, absolutely. Do you?
Even though that seems to be waning right
Yeah.
now. In popularity, again.
It shouldn't. Yeah. Protect the noggin, dude.
Nah, it's bullshit.
Right? Do you want to
Always.
ride bikes with us and be spooky internet friends? Or maybe just be spooky internet friends? Because bikes can be scary. You can find us at Bones and Bobbins.
Yes.
On Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, all of the social medias. Or you can just go to bonesandbobbins.com.
Yes, you can definitely go to there. It's where the show notes live. And don't forget to rate and review this podcast, specifically if you like it. It's totally fine for you to skip that step if you don't, because that's cool. We don't need to be for everyone. But if you like us, please do rate and review, because it pleases the internet gremlins. And that's how we show up in recommendations so that other morbid souls can find us.
Bring forth the morbid souls!
All of them! Oh, and we have received special dispensation to feed those internet gremlins at any time of the day. So.
Anytime.
So it'll be all right. Yeah.
And on that note, let us leave you with some advice that you should never, ever forget. Lock your doors.
And don't run with scissors.
Don't do it.
No.
Nope. Not even a little bit.
Oh my goodness. And on that note, goodbye, everyone. Have a good rest of your week.
Goodbye. Each episode of the Bones and Bobbins podcast is written and researched by Haley Pearson Cox and Natalie Hoyce. Our music was composed by Loyalty Freak Music. You can find us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at Bones and Bobbins. Subscribe now on Apple Podcasts, follow us on Spotify, or check us out wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts so you won't miss a minute of our strange and creepy content.